I was 63 when I stood on the porch of the house I had poured my life into, keys digging into my palm, groceries slipping down my wrists, and found that the door no longer opened for me. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. My name is Martha, and that was the moment I realized I had been erased, shut out of my own life, like a character someone had decided didn't fit the next chapter. At first, I thought the lock was just jammed. It had happened before, when the weather turned, and the wood swelled a little. I twisted, jiggled, tried again. The porch light wasn't on, and the whole place seemed unusually dark. But I didn't think much of it until I bent to retrieve a bag I'd dropped and spotted a folded sheet of paper taped awkwardly to the side of the mailbox. No envelope, no warmth, just something stiff and cold fluttering in the breeze like a final word left behind in a hurry. There was no handwriting, just printed words, short and dry, as if typed by someone who didn't want their voice attached to them. My heart sank before I even finished reading. I didn't belong there anymore. That much was clear. They had changed the locks and made it clear that I was no longer welcome. It wasn't framed as punishment, but rather as some sort of neutral decision, one made for the sake of space, peace, or boundaries. But standing there with the weight of that paper in one hand and the sting of humiliation rising in my chest, all I could feel was that I had been discarded. I didn't cry right away. I just sat on the top step of the porch, the same place I used to sit with my grandson when we read picture books, and waited for the school bus. I placed the bag of groceries, her favorite tea, apples, bread from the bakery she loved, beside me, and tried to understand how a door I had helped finance and paint and decorate now stood closed against me like I was a solicitor or an intruder. The windows stayed dark. There was no movement inside, no soft laugh from the kitchen, no little footsteps rushing down the hall. Only silence, cold, deliberate silence. And the worst part wasn't that they had done this, it was that I hadn't seen it coming, not fully. There had been signs, of course. Lately, Sarah had stopped calling and started texting vague updates. Dinners had become quieter, with forced smiles and eyes that avoided mine. She started saying things about needing room to grow or feeling overwhelmed, and I chalked it up to the stress of motherhood and work. I never once imagined that the daughter I'd devoted my entire adult life to, after losing her father when she was barely old enough to remember his face, would turn away so completely. I gave up dating, traveling, saving for my own future, just so I could be there for her. I downsized my job, moved into the guest room of that very house when she needed help with her children, told myself it was temporary, that I was just supporting her the way a mother should. And yet somehow, somewhere along the way, I became too much, too present, too opinionated, too involved. It wasn't said out loud, but I started to feel it in the way she glanced at her husband when I spoke, or how she double-checked my stories with the kids, as if I were distorting reality. I ignored those feelings, pushed them aside with the comfort of habit. I baked birthday cakes. I folded laundry. I swept the kitchen floor while they watched movies upstairs. I let them have the master bedroom and kept to my corner, thinking I was being generous, flexible, kind. But apparently, that wasn't the version of me they wanted anymore. That night, I didn't go to a hotel, and I didn't call anyone to talk it through. Most of the people I used to lean on were gone or drifting. I had poured everything into one relationship, into Sarah and the family she built, and now that connection had snapped clean through, leaving me with no backup plan. I drove to the parking lot behind the grocery store and curled up in the car, coat over my knees, eyes wide open to the buzzing overhead lights and the cold silence of a world that had moved on without me. I barely slept. The next morning, when I checked my phone out of instinct, there were no calls, no missed messages, just one, short, formal, stripped of feeling, explaining that the decision was final, that this was healthier for everyone, that I should try to understand and move on. I stared at the screen for a long time, not in anger, but in disbelief. I had never imagined that love could end like that, not with a shout, not with a slammed door, but with carefully chosen phrases and locked metal. I sat in the car for hours, not because I didn't have anywhere to go, but because I didn't know who I was anymore. I had built my identity around being needed. I was the helper, the fixer, the grandmother who always said yes. And now, stripped of all of it in a single weekend, I was just a woman with no house, no role, no welcome. But deep inside, Under all that numbness, something else began to stir. Not rage, not revenge, but a quiet clarity. If they didn't want me in that house, that was their choice. But they didn't get to take my story, my truth, or my strength with them. They could change the locks, but I still had the key to everything they tried to erase, and I wasn't about to disappear. The following week passed in a haze of motion and numbness, as if I were walking through water. Slow, muted, weightless, and heavy all at once. I moved from one temporary place to the next, crashing on a fold-out cot at a local church shelter one night, then in the dusty back room of a woman named Jade, a kind young neighbor who saw me sitting in my car and offered tea and silence without questions. I told her I was just going through something family-related, and she didn't pry. I think, deep down, she knew it was worse than I made it sound. On the fourth morning, I found myself at the corner bakery with two $20 bills left in my wallet and no appetite to speak of. Still, I bought a lemon cake, the same kind I'd made every single year for Jamie's birthday since the day he turned 2, and discovered he didn't like chocolate. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Habit, maybe, or foolish hope, but I placed the box carefully in the passenger seat and drove toward the house, more out of instinct than intention. I didn't park out front. I stopped on the next street over, where the neighbor's shrubs had grown tall enough to hide my car. I told myself I just wanted to see the balloons, maybe wave to my grandson if he happened to run outside. Just a glimpse, just a moment. The sound of children laughing hit me before I even turned the corner. I could hear the pop of music, someone clapping, the high-pitched bark of Rusty losing his mind over all the activity. I peered through the wooden slats of the backyard fence and felt my stomach drop. The yard was filled with color. Streamers, tables, even one of those inflatable bounce houses that bulged and pulsed as kids tumbled inside. Evan was grilling. Sarah stood near the cake table, laughing with a woman I recognized vaguely. One of Evan's cousins, I thought. My heart thudded when I spotted Jamie, all legs and energy, darting toward the slide with a sparkler in hand. He looked older, bigger, and in that moment impossibly far away from me. I waited and waited. I told myself maybe I had the day wrong or the time. But no, this was his party. It was happening without me, and no one had even bothered to send a message, not even a lie about keeping it small this year. There was cake, there were presents, there were guests, dozens of them, and yet somehow there wasn't room for me. The woman who had swaddled Jamie as a newborn while Sarah tried to sleep off an emergency C-section. The one who sang to him through his ear infections and stayed up all night steaming humidifiers. The one who introduced him to lemon cake in the first place. I sat there for almost an hour, the box untouched beside me, growing warmer in the sun. Eventually, the backyard quieted. The laughter faded, and guests began to leave. Some carried balloons, others threw out paper plates, and not once did Sarah glance toward the road or even seem to notice that someone was missing. And maybe that was the clearest message of all. My absence wasn't an oversight. It was part of the plan. I didn't go to the door. I didn't knock. I just drove away slowly, the cake still sealed in its plastic dome, and felt something crumble inside me that I hadn't known was still intact. There was a particular kind of humiliation in being excluded not by accident, but by design. They didn't forget me. They chose to erase me, and they made sure everyone else had a piece of cake while I sat alone with mine in silence. Later that evening, when I finally returned to Jade's tiny guest room and set the untouched cake down on the nightstand, she came in and noticed the box. I must have looked worse than I felt because she sat beside me and offered me a blanket. No questions. I ended up telling her everything, not in one big confession, but in bits and pieces, like peeling wallpaper that kept revealing more underneath the longer I spoke. She listened the whole time, nodding gently, and at one point, her hand brushed mine and stayed there, steady and warm. That simple touch felt more comforting than anything I'd felt in weeks, not because she pitied me, but because she saw me fully, without conditions. In the days that followed, I kept trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the last few months in my head, searching for the moment when everything shifted. There had been friction, sure, disagreements about bedtime routines, the way I folded the laundry, whether or not it was helpful when I brought groceries without being asked. Sarah had started saying things like I was hovering too much, that she needed space, that therapy had helped her set boundaries. At the time, I thought she was just stressed. I backed off. I gave her space. I tried to be quieter, smaller, more agreeable. But maybe it had already been too late. I remembered one evening, a few months earlier, when Evan came home from work and found me sweeping up broken glass after Jamie knocked over a vase. He barely looked at me when he said, half under his breath, that the house felt like it was getting a little crowded these days. I had smiled, said I'd try to keep my things tucked away, told him not to worry. But I remembered the way he looked at Sarah afterward. A glance, a nod, like some silent agreement had passed between them. The more I reflected, the more I realized that this wasn't about one bad moment. It was about erosion, slow, silent erosion of trust, of gratitude, of the roles we thought we held in each other's lives. Somewhere along the way, I had gone from mother to inconvenience, from foundation to burden. And once someone labels you a burden, it becomes very easy for them to justify putting you down, packing you up, and locking you out, physically, emotionally, and otherwise. That night, I finally opened the cake box and sat on the edge of the cot with a plastic fork, eating in silence, not because I wanted to, but because throwing it away felt like admitting I was never part of the celebration to begin with. The frosting was too sweet, the sponge too dry, and yet I ate it slowly, bite after bite, until the candle-shaped sugar topper dissolved between my teeth like the last trace of a memory I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. I spent the next few days drifting through hours like a ghost in my own skin, washing the same coffee mug at Jade's place 3 times in one afternoon just to keep my hands busy, folding towels that weren't mine, pretending to be useful in a life that wasn't mine either. Jade never said much, but her silence was a comfort, the kind that didn't push or prod, just let me breathe. I didn't tell her how I sometimes sat awake until 3 in the morning, staring at my phone, rereading the last message Sarah had sent, those flat, rehearsed words about how this is healthier for all of us, and how I need to respect her boundaries. That word kept echoing like an insult dressed up in therapy speak, boundaries, as if I had crossed into some forbidden space just by showing up with groceries or by asking how Jamie's fever was doing. As if care had become surveillance, as if love, when offered too often, turned into control. I started questioning everything, every moment, every memory. Was I too involved? Did I offer too many opinions? Was I overbearing? Or did they just decide I was easier to erase than confront? But then something strange happened. It started with a knock on the door one evening while Jade was at work. I opened it, expecting a package or a neighbor, and froze when I saw Brian, Evan's old college friend, someone who used to come by the house for backyard barbecues and big football Sundays. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, as if he hadn't meant to find me but couldn't bring himself to walk away. His eyes flicked past me into the hallway, then back again. He apologized for the surprise visit and said he'd only stopped by to drop off something for Jade's brother, Rick. But when he saw me through the window, he felt like he should say something. I asked him what that meant, and he hesitated, biting his lip before finally telling me, in a voice low and tight, that things at the house weren't quite what they seemed. I felt a cold ripple crawl up my spine as I waited, heart thudding, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. He said he'd been at Jamie's birthday party. Of course he had. Nearly everyone was. And during a conversation with Evan and his mother, something about me came up. They were laughing, talking about how it was finally done and how it took longer than they thought, but at least now she's out. According to Brian, Evan's mother, Evelyn, had made some comment about cleaning up the past before it infects the future. Those words didn't even make sense to me at first. Infects the future? What was I? A disease? Brian didn't stay long. I think guilt brought him to the door, but fear sent him away just as fast. He didn't want to be caught in the middle, but his visit lit a spark in me, something sharp and electric. It was the first time I considered that maybe this hadn't been entirely Sarah's idea. Maybe, just maybe, someone had been whispering in her ear, shaping her fears, feeding her doubts. And if that was true, then everything I thought I understood about this rupture between us wasn't just painful, it was manipulated. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering small things I had brushed aside at the time, how Evelyn, with her pearl earrings and tight, dry smile, would always sit a little too close to Sarah during family dinners, steering the conversation away from me, dropping little comments like, "Mothers need to know when to let go," or "Young families have to make their own rules." I remembered how she insisted on helping with their taxes, how she had connections at the bank, how Sarah's tone had started to change only after Evelyn began visiting more often. It was subtle, almost surgical, but now, in hindsight, I could see the pattern. I also remembered the afternoon I overheard Evan in the kitchen talking on the phone to someone he thought was on hold. He said something about waiting until the paperwork clears, and I assumed it had to do with refinancing. Or maybe Sarah's job, but what if it wasn't? What if they had already been planning to take the house, my home, out from under me? Not through argument, but through patience and quiet planning. I was living there, but I wasn't protected. I'd never asked for a legal agreement. I didn't think I needed one. I was their mother, their helper, their safety net. Now, I was just a loose end. The next day, I pulled out an old folder from my bag, the one where I kept our family documents, copies of birth certificates, Sarah's college acceptance letter, even a faded photo of Jamie from his preschool graduation. And tucked inside, I found the original mortgage paperwork from the year they bought the house. My name wasn't on the title, just the loan agreement. I had co-signed, yes, but when they refinanced 3 years ago, supposedly to lower the monthly payments, they never added me back in. I remembered Evans saying not to worry about it, that it was just a temporary step. I had believed him. God help me, I had believed him. I stared at those papers until my eyes burned, and the weight of it all, the legal finality of it, settled in my chest like concrete. I hadn't just been locked out. I had been removed, silently, deliberately, and Sarah, whether she understood what she'd allowed or not, had gone along with it. That was the night something shifted in me. Not loud or angry, but quiet and fierce. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself, but builds beneath the surface like a storm. I realized I could sit in this shame forever, waiting for her to reach out, or I could start uncovering what they had really done, not to punish, not even to reclaim the house, but to reclaim myself, my story, my voice, the version of me they had tried so hard to erase with a closed door and a changed lock. And I wasn't done knocking. The strange thing was how quiet betrayal could feel after it settled in, like a hum beneath everything, low and constant, making even the smallest moments feel off balance. I woke up each morning in Jade's spare room, not quite knowing what day it was or where I was supposed to go. The same brown folder sat next to the bed, filled with papers that didn't quite make sense anymore. Names and numbers that used to be part of my life now staring back at me like they belonged to someone else. I stopped expecting to hear from Sarah. I stopped believing there would be a message or an apology or even a sign of doubt. I had poured every part of myself into raising her, and it felt like she had turned that gift into something disposable. Still, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. There was something too strange, too deliberate about the way I was pushed out. Not just emotionally, but legally, almost surgically. I needed to know how deep it went. So I went back to the credit union just to ask a few questions. I had banked there for years, even opened Sarah's first savings account when she was in high school. The woman at the counter smiled at first, but her tone changed when she looked up my name. She told me, in a rehearsed sort of way, that I no longer had access to the accounts tied to the house. She mentioned a change in authorization, a shift in legal control, something about a power of attorney I had supposedly signed. I remember standing there, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart started racing. I hadn't signed anything. I knew that much, but she wouldn't say more, only that the system had been updated. I left the building in a daze, feeling like I was walking underwater. Like I'd lost not just my home, but my name. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was paperwork. It was done on purpose. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside on the back steps of Jade's house and stared up at the trees, barely able to see the stars, thinking about every small moment I had ignored. Sarah's new vocabulary about boundaries, Evan's casual comments about paperwork, Evelyn's polite but constant presence during every family decision. Something deeper was going on, and if I wanted to understand it, I couldn't do it alone. The next morning, I called Helen. She had been a friend years ago, back when we worked at the library together, back when life was simpler and Sarah still needed me. Helen had once been a paralegal, and she always said that if you followed the documents long enough, the truth would eventually show itself. She agreed to meet me later that afternoon at a little diner off Route 7. The place hadn't changed. Faded vinyl booths, too bright lighting, and coffee that tasted like cardboard. But Helen looked thinner, a little tired around the eyes, though just as sharp as ever. We sat across from each other, going through every page I had: deeds, tax returns, refinance statements, and when we got to one particular document from 3 years ago, the year Evan convinced Sarah to refinance the house, she paused. She didn't say anything right away, just looked down at the signature on the last page, then slowly turned it toward me and tapped her finger against the name written there. I recognized it immediately. It was mine, but not in my handwriting. That was the moment everything shifted. I hadn't signed that form. I hadn't even seen it, but my name was on it, in neat, deliberate strokes, just close enough to pass as mine, but too perfect, too clean. Helen didn't need to say it. I already knew. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had taken my name and used it to cut me out of the house I helped pay for, the house I had moved into so they could raise their kids without struggling. I sat there for a long time, the noise of the diner fading away, the coffee going cold in my hands, and tried to breathe past the heavy pressure in my chest. Helen told me we'd need help if we wanted to do anything about it. Legal help. Someone who knew how the county worked. She called in a favor and took me to meet a man named Rick Caldwell later that evening. He was a retired investigator who lived in a small ranch-style house surrounded by dry trees and dusty wind, the kind of place that felt solid and forgotten all at once. Rick didn't ask questions right away. He just listened while we explained everything, from the forged signature to the strange behavior, from Sarah's withdrawal to Evelyn's sudden involvement in family finances. He flipped through the documents slowly, with steady hands, and when he finished, he looked up and told me something that finally made sense of the whole mess. This wasn't just a family falling apart, this was a plan. Rick explained that power of attorney isn't something that gets assigned accidentally. Someone had filed paperwork behind my back. Someone had convinced a bank, or maybe a notary, that I had stepped aside willingly, and that someone had started preparing to sell the house. He checked in with a contact at the recorder's office and confirmed it. The sale documents had already been drafted. A private showing was scheduled for the end of the week. A real estate agent tied to Evelyn's old law firm had been handling it quietly, without a public listing. They were going to sell it. My home, the only real thing I had left in this world, gone, like I had never existed there. It didn't feel like a punch to the gut. It felt colder, more like a quiet erasure, as if someone had taken a pencil and gently rubbed out every trace of me, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had become inconvenient. A leftover, a name they didn't want on the records. Rick told me that if I wanted to stop the sale, I had to move fast. We'd need to prove the signature was fake, find the right people who could support the claim, and file a motion to pause the transaction. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be cheap, but it was possible. I looked at Helen, who gave me a small nod, and for the first time in weeks, I stopped feeling like a victim. I still didn't have a place to go. I didn't have a title or money or anything solid to stand on. But I had the truth, and I had people who believed me. They thought they could take everything, and I would just disappear. But I wasn't going anywhere. After everything Rick told me, it felt as though the last layers of illusion had finally peeled away. No more wondering if I had misunderstood. No more second-guessing every quiet moment between Sarah and me. No more reaching for hope that maybe this was all just a phase. I no longer believed this had been emotional distance or generational tension. This had been planned, and not just by her. There were hands behind this, shaping it from the shadows. Paperwork doesn't lie, and someone had used mine as a weapon against me. But even knowing all that, I still didn't have a place to sleep that night. Jade had been generous, endlessly so, but her brother Rick, different from the investigator, was coming into town with his family, and her 2-bedroom house couldn't hold one more soul. I smiled when she told me, assured her I'd find somewhere, even cracked a joke I didn't mean, and left with my coat buttoned up to my chin, even though the evening was warm. I wasn't angry at her. If anything, I was grateful for her kindness, her silence, her steady eyes that didn't shrink away from my unraveling. But I knew I had to stop borrowing space in someone else's life. So I drove. I didn't know where I was headed, just let the road carry me toward the edge of town, past places that used to feel familiar, old gas stations with half-lit signs, shuttered diners with chairs stacked in the windows, distant fields turning gold beneath a sky that refused to darken all the way. My hands hurt from gripping the steering wheel too tight, and my lower back ached in that slow, grinding way it always did when stress took over. Then I remembered the old property, my cousin's land, long abandoned, but technically still in the family. I hadn't been there in over 10 years, not since her son passed away, and she moved to Arizona. The house would be locked up, probably half collapsed by now, but the barn had always been sturdy, and behind it, tucked between 2 elms and a rusting water tank, was an old wooden chicken coop that we once used as a playhouse when we were kids. I didn't expect comfort. I just needed shelter. When I pulled into the gravel path, grass brushed up against both sides of my car, and the sound of tires crunching over rock made me feel like I was walking on bones. The house was exactly as I imagined. Dark, hollow, sagging, but the barn stood tall, and the coop was still there, its roof a little warped, one door hanging slightly off hinge. I used the flashlight from my phone to peek inside. It smelled like earth and wood rot and something long forgotten. I set down a folded blanket, curled into one corner where the hay was still dry, and wrapped myself in the wool shawl I always kept in the trunk. That's where I slept, surrounded by memories and silence. I woke up early, before the sun had fully risen, my joints stiff and my neck aching, but strangely calm. The air was cool and thick with the scent of wet grass, and a light breeze swept in through a crack between the boards. I stepped outside and watched a layer of mist roll over the fields, like breath exhaled from the earth. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a problem someone had to manage. I didn't feel like a burden. I was simply a person in a quiet place, trying to remember who she had been before she was someone else's sacrifice. Later that morning, I stopped at a gas station to buy the cheapest coffee they had and a banana I didn't end up eating. I sat on the hood of my car and stared out across the empty parking lot, trying to figure out my next move. That's when I heard someone call my name, not loudly, more like a question, almost hesitant. I turned and saw a woman I vaguely recognized from the elementary school where Jamie used to go. Her name was Carol, I think. She worked in the front office. She looked surprised to see me, then stepped closer, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might hear. She told me, nervously, with the kind of guilt that spills over, that Jamie had asked about me at the school's family night. Apparently, he had whispered to her when no one was looking, asked if she knew where his grandmother had gone. He told her I hadn't been around, and no one at home would talk about me. Carol said she didn't know what to say to him, that she'd never seen him look so confused. That moment broke something in me in a way that all the paperwork and silence never could, knowing that Jamie still remembered me, still wondered, still asked. That was a thread I hadn't known I still held on to, and the idea that Sarah had shut me out so completely that even my grandson was being denied the truth, that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something sharp and irreversible. I thanked Carol. I didn't ask her to pass along a message. I didn't make any promises. I just thanked her for telling me. Then I sat back in my car and cried. Not loud, not shaking, just a slow, quiet release that felt more like rain than thunder. Later that day, I met Helen at her rented room above the hardware store. She had pulled more files, talked to people she trusted, and printed out affidavits from notaries and tax clerks who vaguely remembered the woman who signed but didn't speak much, referring to a visit from Evelyn and Evan the year the deed was quietly changed. Helen handed me a thin, weathered envelope with my husband's handwriting on the front, something I had found the night before, hidden at the bottom of an old keepsake box I hadn't touched in years. I hadn't opened it yet. I don't know why I waited. Maybe I was afraid it would make me miss him more, or maybe I knew it would give me the strength to do what needed to be done. When I finally slid my finger beneath the flap and unfolded the letter inside, it wasn't a speech. It wasn't even emotional. Just a list. His kind of list. Things to remember in case life ever became confusing or unfair. Keep copies. Protect your signature. Don't be afraid to walk away. Love without surrender. And don't let silence replace your voice. That last line stayed with me. It still does. That night, I returned to the chicken coop, not because I had to, but because it felt more honest than pretending I was fine. I lit a small candle, watched its glow flicker against the worn wood walls, and wrote down every step I had taken to get here. Every detail, every betrayal, every name. I wasn't just trying to get my house back anymore. I was trying to rebuild the version of myself they had erased, and I was just getting started. There's a strange kind of strength that settles in after you've run out of places to fall. It doesn't come loudly or all at once, but quietly, like the slow spread of morning light after a sleepless night, illuminating everything you had tried so hard not to look at. That's how I felt by the end of that week, like someone who had already been broken open and was now being reshaped by something harder than grief. I didn't know yet what my plan would be. Not in any concrete sense, but I knew I needed to see the house again. Not as someone knocking on the door and asking to be let in, but as someone who needed to see the truth for herself. Unfiltered, unprepared, uninvited. So I drove back. Not directly, not boldly. I parked 3 houses down, where the old magnolia tree bent low enough to hide my car from the street. I waited until late afternoon, when traffic on the block slowed, when the last joggers passed with headphones in and eyes down. I walked slowly, staying close to fences, using shrubs as cover. My body knew every step of that neighborhood better than I wanted to admit. I had pushed strollers down these sidewalks, dragged garbage cans across these curbs, waved to mailmen and Girl Scouts and neighbors who used to smile at me, and now I was skimming the edges of it like a stranger, like someone who had wandered too far into a story that no longer had space for her name. I reached the back alley behind the house, the one lined with old wooden fences and garbage bins that hadn't been emptied in a week. I stayed hidden near the tall slats behind the backyard, careful not to step on the gravel too loudly. Through a narrow gap between the boards, I saw the yard. Green, clean, carefully curated. The swing set was still there, the one I helped assemble on a blistering summer day when Jamie turned 5. It had been repainted. I noticed that immediately. The colors were different, less playful, more polished, more curated, like everything else now. They had changed things. From my spot in the shadows, I watched as people moved in and out of the house. Realtors with tablets in hand. A woman in heels snapping photos of the kitchen windows. A man pointing toward the backyard with a clipboard under his arm. It wasn't just a sale. It was a performance. The cushions on the porch swing had been replaced. The garden had been trimmed to perfection. Someone had laid out lemonade and cookies on the counter inside, as if that house had always belonged to someone else. Someone warm and welcoming. Someone who had never locked out her mother and scrubbed her family history from the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, one eye pressed to the gap in the wood, and felt the raw, quiet sting of being replaced, not just physically, but symbolically. This wasn't just about real estate. It was about erasure. After the showing ended and the yard emptied out, I waited long enough to be sure they were gone. Then I walked slowly toward the house. Not the front, never again the front, but around the side, through the spot in the fence where the wood had rotted just enough to make space for someone determined enough to slip through. I stepped over the grass like it still belonged to me, even if I knew it didn't anymore. I moved past the garden beds, where my name was once painted on a rock Jamie had given me for Mother's Day, now nowhere to be seen. I reached the back door and tried the knob, not because I thought it would open, but because some part of me needed to feel the resistance. Of course, it was locked, but I noticed the side gate was ajar, and near the garage, the old tool shed door hung loose on its frame. I slipped inside, heart pounding, my palms damp with adrenaline, my body remembering what it was like to be inside this space when it meant comfort instead of exile. It smelled like grass and sawdust and motor oil. The shelves were still lined with bins I had labeled years ago in my best handwriting. One for Christmas lights, one for hand tools, one for baby clothes Sarah never had the heart to throw away. I ran my hand across the dusty workbench and stopped when I felt something wedged between 2 wooden planks in the far corner. A thin tin box. Flat. Long forgotten. I pulled it out slowly, brushing off the grime. It was one of the old family boxes. The kind we used to store old letters and photos in before we started putting everything on flash drives and cloud folders. I recognized it instantly because I had packed it away myself after Sarah's wedding. tucked it behind a shelf for safekeeping. I opened it, expecting nothing, maybe a few dried-out film strips or old receipts. But what I found instead stopped me cold. Inside were letters, handwritten ones, from my husband to Sarah. Letters I had never seen, dozens of them, folded carefully, each dated, each addressed in the same careful script he always used when he wanted to be taken seriously. Some were old, from before she went to college, but some were from just before he passed. Ones he must have written during those last painful weeks when he couldn't speak anymore, but still tried to leave behind something for her to carry. I had never known they existed. She had never mentioned them, and now they were buried in a shed, tucked away like forgotten tools. I didn't read them. Not there, not yet. But I held them close, my hands shaking not from rage, but from something deeper, something like heartbreak layered with confusion. Why hide them? Why keep them from me? Why pretend they weren't there? I took the box and slipped out the way I came. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I had seen what I needed to see. The world they were building didn't have space for the truth. It was designed for photographs and perfect lighting and the illusion of harmony. But what I had now wasn't illusion. It was proof of silence, of secrecy, of erasure. That night, back at the coop, I sat with the box in my lap and finally opened the first letter. His words hit like sunlight breaking through clouds. Gentle, warm, but undeniable. He had known something even then. He had seen it coming. Not this exact betrayal maybe, but the distance, the drift, the hunger for control that always crept in through small compromises. He had written to Sarah, not just with love, but with warning. He had asked her to remember what mattered, and now she had chosen to bury that too. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we could win, but I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't imagined any of this, and I wasn't wrong to fight. There's a certain kind of silence that fills a courtroom before the judge enters. Thick, suspended, filled with barely contained nerves and eyes that dart everywhere except where they should. I sat in that silence with my palms folded tightly in my lap, my spine straight, even though every muscle in my body ached. I hadn't worn that navy blue dress in years, the one I bought for Sarah's graduation, and it pinched at the sides now, but I wore it anyway. It reminded me of who I used to be, present, proud, included, and I needed every piece of strength I could borrow from memory. We had filed the injunction just in time. Rick and Helen had worked around the clock, pulling records, calling in favors, tracking down witnesses, and building a chain of inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. The judge had agreed to pause the sale of the house until the forgery claims could be investigated. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a wedge. Just enough time to speak before they locked me out for good. Evan sat 2 rows ahead with his lawyer, crisp in his expensive suit, jaw tight, pretending not to glance back at me. Sarah hadn't shown up at first. I tried not to look for her, but my eyes kept scanning the doorway, caught between dread and longing. When she finally walked in, nearly 30 minutes after the hearing began, her face was unreadable, composed, almost tired, but not sad, not ashamed. She sat beside Evan without a word, and something inside me sank in a way that felt final. The court moved slowly, the way courts always do, with long pauses and jargon that makes everything feel distant. But when it came time to speak, when the judge asked to hear our side, Helen stood and delivered it like a story that had been waiting too long to be told. She laid out every detail: the forged refinance form, the suspicious notary filing, the quiet power of attorney transfer that had stripped me of every legal right to the house I had helped fund and lived in for more than a decade. She brought out witness statements, a handwriting analysis, financial inconsistencies, even screenshots of realtor correspondence that dated back before I was ever asked to leave. The defense tried to paint me as confused, emotional, too close to the situation to see it clearly. They suggested I had voluntarily stepped away, that my role in the household had naturally diminished. But then Helen brought out the final piece, the box of letters I had found in the shed. She explained calmly and clearly that these letters, never shared with me, proved a pattern of withholding and control, that they were not just private, but deliberately hidden, further proving the family's intention to isolate and erase. Then came the moment that no one expected. The judge asked if anyone else wished to speak, and from the very back of the room, a voice rose. Not mine, not Helen's, but Jamie's. He stood up with a small envelope in his hand, one I hadn't seen before. I watched as he walked slowly past Sarah, past Evan, and placed it on the table in front of the clerk. His cheeks were red, his hands were shaking, but he stood there, taller than I remembered, and told the judge that he had written a letter after family night at school. When he noticed I was gone and no one would say why, he hadn't intended for anyone to read it. It was just something he had written for himself. But when he saw me outside the house days later, hiding behind the fence and too afraid to come closer, he understood something was wrong. Deeply wrong. His words weren't flowery, they weren't dramatic, but they were true. And the truth, spoken from a child who missed his grandmother, landed heavier than any document or legal argument ever could. After that, everything changed. The judge paused. The room went still. No verdict was issued that day. Not officially, but I saw it in Sarah's face when Jamie returned to his seat. I saw the way her shoulders curled in slightly, how her gaze dropped, how her fingers trembled when she reached for her water. For the first time, I saw doubt crack through that polished exterior. And it wasn't the doubt of someone caught in a lie. It was the doubt of someone finally realizing they'd handed the steering wheel of their life to someone else and only now understood how far off course they'd gone. The hearing ended in procedural limbo. The judge granted a formal investigation into the forgery and extended the freeze on the house sale. It was not the final decision, but it was enough. Enough to stop them. Enough to prove I wasn't making this up. Enough to force the truth into the open, whether they liked it or not. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had felt in months, not because I had won, but because I had been heard, because I was no longer a rumor, a whisper, a memory too inconvenient to keep. I was there, I was present, I was fighting, and even if the outcome remained uncertain, I knew that everything had already shifted. What they had taken from me, my home, my role, my place, I was already in the process of reclaiming. Not just in court, but in my soul. The weeks after the hearing passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet drives between the courthouse and the little borrowed room where I kept my things folded neatly in a suitcase I never fully unpacked. And although the judge hadn't made a final ruling that day, it felt like something deep had already shifted, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of those who had tried so hard to pretend I was never really there. When the final ruling came in, I was sitting outside the courthouse on a wooden bench that creaked beneath me every time I shifted my weight. And when Helen handed me the envelope, I didn't open it right away, because somehow I already knew what was inside. The judge had ruled in my favor. The sale of the house had been permanently blocked, and while I wasn't granted full ownership, my equity was restored, my name reinstated on the title, and most importantly, the legal record now acknowledged that what had been done to me was not a misunderstanding, but a calculated act of fraud. I was free to return to the house if I wanted to, but I didn't. The truth is, I had already been back once, quietly, after the hearing, just to walk through the rooms and see if they still meant something to me. And as I stepped through the front door with the same key that had once been tossed aside in silence, I looked around and felt nothing but emptiness. Like walking through a shell of something that used to feel warm and alive, but now echoed with a kind of silence that didn't belong to me anymore. The kitchen smelled like new paint and lemon cleaner. The curtains were different. The couch was gone. And every surface had been wiped of the life I once built there. Not just physically, but emotionally. Like even the air had been taught to forget me. So, I let it go. With Rick's help, I used my restored share to claim a quiet financial settlement and walked away from the property altogether, choosing instead to buy a small 2-bedroom cottage about 45 minutes away in a coastal town where no one knew my name and no one expected anything from me except exactly what I chose to give. The house had chipped siding and wild ivy crawling up the side like it had been left untamed for too long. But the first time I stepped inside and heard the floorboards creak under my own feet, I knew I didn't have to ask permission to exist there. It was mine, and that was enough. I spent those first few weeks doing things I hadn't done in years, sleeping in without guilt, reading with the windows open, planting herbs on the windowsill without wondering if anyone else needed the space. And just when I started to think this might be what peace actually feels like, I received a pale blue envelope in the mail with no return address and a shaky, familiar handwriting that made my hands tremble before I even opened it. Inside was a short letter from Jamie, not carefully written, not even spelled perfectly, but honest and raw in the way children always are when no one's watching them too closely. He had found my new address through someone at school. Maybe Helen, maybe Carol, I'll never really know. But he wrote that he missed me, that he didn't understand why I disappeared, and that his mom didn't talk about it much, except to say things had gotten complicated and that she was sorry, though the word had clearly come too late, if it had come at all. He asked if he could visit in the summer. He said he missed the lemon cake. He asked if the birds still sang in the mornings like they used to. I folded that letter slowly, carefully, as if it might tear in my hands if I breathed too hard. And I sat by the window that night with the lights off, the only sound being the soft hum of the ocean breeze against the glass, and I cried in that quiet, full way that doesn't ache. It just releases. I hadn't expected anything to be fixed. I hadn't expected to be wanted again. But somehow, even through all the silence and separation, the one person I thought I had lost forever had still felt the pull of something real, something rooted, something no court ruling or locked door could destroy. And just when I thought the story was ending, just when I thought the worst was behind me, the final letter came, buried deep in a stack of long-forgotten documents Helen had requested from the county archives, a sealed envelope from my late husband's estate. Never forwarded to me because the listed address had been changed the same year Sarah and Evan refinanced the house. Inside was a notarized amendment to his will that had been signed shortly before his health declined, naming me as the sole financial trustee over any real estate assets passed to Sarah, stating clearly that no sale or financial change could be made to any shared property without my full written consent. It had been there the entire time, buried, ignored, and when I showed it to Rick, he didn't say a word. He just picked up the phone. The second legal case was shorter, cleaner, colder. The court froze the remaining funds in Sarah and Evan's joint account and ordered full financial restitution for the unlawful transfer and forged refinance. The house, now empty, was placed under lien and prepared for sale to repay damages. Evan, now barred from working in finance, left town quietly. Evelyn disappeared from every board she once led, and Sarah stopped replying to anything at all. In the end, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. I got something far better. The truth, the paper trail, and the justice that spoke not through fury, but through facts. They had tried to erase me, and instead, they erased themselves. And me? I built something new. One evening, while browsing a secondhand bookstore near the harbor, I met someone. His name was Mark, a retired history professor who wore worn shoes and always had a question in his eyes, but never asked more than I was ready to share. We started with quiet walks, conversations about books and birds and how strange it is to start over when you never thought you'd have to. And slowly, so slowly, something soft began to grow again inside me. Not in place of what had been lost, but beside it, like a tree growing next to the ruins of an old home, not erasing the past, but giving it shade. And now, if you're still here, if you're still listening, I want to ask you something. Has anyone ever tried to shut you out of your own life? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you raised, someone you trusted, someone you loved enough to give everything to? If so, you're not alone. And if you're still rebuilding, or even just surviving, your story matters too. So tell me, what would you have done? Leave a comment. I'll be reading.